Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to the next episode. We left off when Luka rejected the Lillian again, and Luka told Ailey, I know you are interested in Lillian, so go on, I don't like her, but Ailey replied, it's impossible for me. The episode begins with a breathtaking view of the Emperor's electricity production unit, a towering structure surrounded by metal pathways, with magma cascading down through massive reinforced conduits. The air sizzles with heat, thick smoke rising into the atmosphere, creating an otherworldly glow around the facility. Perched atop one of the metal bridges, two figures sat in complete stillness, their silhouettes barely shifting against the intense red glow beneath them. Luka, dressed in an Emperor flag insignia shirt, sat in a meditation position, his eyes closed, focusing on his breathing. His thoughts, however, were anything but calm. This training is about meditation. I need to remain calm regardless of the situation. Beside him sat Kinuin, equally composed, his expression unreadable, exuding an aura of absolute control. A moment of silence passed before Luka broke it. Instructor, could you tell me how you would have handled the fight that broke out in the gang's office? Kinuin remained still, his voice calm yet unwavering. I did say I'd tell you if you won. Luka's mind flickered back to that moment, the trapped office, the armed thugs waiting inside and out. Back then, armed thugs were waiting inside and outside the office. I don't see a way to escape that situation unscathed without a weapon. What would Instructor Kinuin have done? Kinuin finally smirked, his eyes still closed as he spoke. I would have ducked under the table when the fight started. Luka's brows furrowed in confusion. Olaf and his thugs all had guns. If your first move was to hide, you'd lose any chance to attack. Kinuin's reply was calm, confident. I know you. You'd take that opportunity to take them down, even if it meant taking a few bullets. Luka clenched his fists. What if I wasn't there? What if I decided to run away or hide? Kinuin cut him off before he could finish. You were planning to take Olaf hostage and use his gun, weren't you? Luka's eyes snapped open, staring at Kinuin in disbelief. Kinuin continued, his voice unwavering. You've been trained to maximize your aggression. I know you've already imagined exactly how you'd take them down. However, if you did take Olaf hostage, you'd just get shot alongside him. Down there, it's not unusual for gang bosses to be replaced. All you would have done is give them an excuse to kill their boss. He finally opened his eyes, turning his piercing gaze toward Luka. Of course, once you became the target of those guns, I'd have taken them down and escaped with you through a secret passage. Luka stared at him, his mind racing. Not only did he predict my actions, he even had a secret escape route planned. The sheer depth of Kinuin's foresight made Luka feel as though he had been playing checkers while his instructor played chess on multiple boards at once. Kinuin stood up, his voice turning calm yet firm. In a language no longer spoken, Arches means keen eyes. Arches Victima utilizes all possible resources of the brain to amplify insight. Remember that. Luka let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. So the problem with your brain was a side effect of pushing it to its limits. Then, suddenly, Luka's eyes widened in realization. A cold chill ran down his spine as he turned to Kinuin in panic. Doesn't that mean, if I equip the Legion, I won't be able to use Arches Victima? Kinuin smirked. You really are sharp. I thought it would take you a couple more months to figure that out. Luka's fists clenched, his teeth grinding in frustration. I will be bestowed a Legion once I become an Imperial Guard. No one can constantly wear Legion, the full-body mechanical armor created with the best technology of the Empire. It's a cybernetic system that utilizes high-bandwidth memory signals. On top of CPUs that provide assistance, all resources in the brain are needed to use it. That means, there won't be any extra resources left for Arches Victima once I wear the Legion. Luka's jaw tightened. Kinuin hid this from me, knowing exactly how I'd react. His breath grew heavier. If I knew it couldn't be used with the Legion, I'd never have learned it. It's my fault, for being dull. He turned abruptly, his boots echoing against the metal bridge as he stormed off. Kinuin simply watched him go, a small, amused smile playing on his lips. So, is this how it ends? Luka didn't look back. His voice was low, tense. Thank you for your teachings, Instructor Kinuin. Kinuin crossed his arms, watching Luka's retreating figure, before calling out one last time. Come back when you change your mind, Luka. Luka kept walking, his frustration boiling beneath the surface. As he disappeared into the industrial maze, his thoughts echoed in his mind, shit. Inside the dimly lit office, Luka stood before Accretian Imperial Guard Chief Centurion Castoria, his posture rigid as the weight of the conversation bore down on him. Castoria, seated behind his grand desk, studied Luka with a sharp gaze before speaking. It has been 3 months. I've been quite busy, so I haven't had the chance to meet the trainees. Luka remained composed, but internally, his thoughts raced. It must be because of the rebellion, just like Ailey said. Hylas Castoria leaned slightly forward. Luka, how have you been doing? Luka's reply was measured and formal. I have been training on my own, as I have not been assigned a mission for a while. The Chief Centurion nodded in acknowledgement before stating matter-of-factly, you won't receive any proper missions for a while. You're already skilled enough to act as a real force for us. Luka suppressed any reaction but felt a flicker of satisfaction. Thank you, Chief Centurion. Then came the unexpected shift. Oh, I heard you've been interacting with Instructor Kinuin quite often. Luka's heartbeat quickened, but his face remained neutral. So this is why he called me. The higher-ups must have figured everything out, from my visit to the lower sector's black market to my participation in the Colosseum. Hylas Castoria's voice remained calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. You're training to use Archy's Victima under Kinuin, aren't you? Luka hesitated only for a second before responding. Not anymore. The Chief Centurion smirked slightly, his eyes narrowing. Let me guess, you were the one who quit, weren't you? Luka's brows furrowed slightly. How did you? Since Archy's Victima cannot be used with the Legion, I felt it was meaningless for someone in the Imperial Guard. Hylas Castoria leaned back, an amused smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. So you figured that out already, huh? Those who lack talent are thrown out by Kinuin, and those with talent soon realize they have no reason to learn it. That is why Kinuin is the sole user of Archy's Victima in the Imperial Guard. Luka processed the information carefully before asking, do you want me to continue learning Archy's Victima? The atmosphere thickened as Hylas Castoria's eyes sharpened. To be exact, I want you to continue being on good terms with Kinuin. For that purpose, you should continue to learn Archy's Victima. This is an order. Luka felt an unsettling chill crawl up his spine. Is the Chief Centurion wary of Instructor Kinuin? Why is he on such high alert against a soldier who has retired from combat? I can't ask questions. My life may be put at risk if I know too much. With no other choice, Luka responded with measured obedience. Understood. I will continue to learn Archy's Victima. Hylas Castoria's smirk deepened. Luka, keep in mind that I'm watching you closely. You're the type to climb high. Luka remained silent, his mind buzzing with unanswered questions. Kinuin examined a small toy helmet in his hands, his expression distant as though trapped in an old memory. I didn't expect you to return so quickly. Luka, dressed in casual clothes, stood behind him, his expression unreadable. He remained silent. Kinuin placed the helmet back into the box and, without turning, continued. Well, I told you to come back anytime, so I won't ask any more questions. Luka finally spoke, his voice calm yet tinged with curiosity. Thank you, Instructor. Yet, deep inside, he remained perplexed. I thought he wouldn't teach me again, but he agreed so easily. His gaze drifted to the toy helmets stacked in boxes. Why are we in the lower sector today? Kinuin remained silent for a moment before finally responding. Do kids these days still like these things? Luka's expression softened slightly, a rare moment of nostalgia flickering in his eyes. When I was younger, I used to spend my time staring at these here. Kinuin walked deeper into the shop, his sharp gaze scanning the surroundings, before addressing the shop owner. The old shopkeeper, still engrossed in his newspaper, barely glanced up. Search for yourself if you're looking for something. I haven't got a clue about toys. Kinuin didn't hesitate. His voice remained firm yet casual. Give me all the toys here. You deliver, don't you? The shopkeeper finally lowered his newspaper, his eyes widening in shock. Everything? Luka's eyes also widened slightly, confusion washing over him. Why is he buying all these toys? Luka looked worried but remained silent as they approached a house. Standing outside the door, he glanced up and asked, Isn't this an orphanage? Lower Sector 47th Orphanage? Kinuin walked ahead, giving Luka a brief glance before saying, Put the box down in the inner field, then take a break. Understood, Luka replied. A familiar voice called out. Hey, Luka! Turning his head, Luka saw Gabriel, who was carrying a stack of boxes under his arms. His expression was filled with annoyance as he complained, You called me for something like this? Do I look like a bellboy to you? Gabriel stomped over, his irritation evident, while Luka remained calm, his hands tucked into his trouser pockets. You did say I could ask you for help, Luka replied smoothly. They wouldn't deliver the toys here, so you were a big help. Gabriel gritted his teeth. No, I meant for you to call me for something grander, something bigger, like maybe a fight against another gang. Luka closed his eyes and smirked faintly. I don't need your help in a fight, stupid. That may be true, but, Gabriel started but was cut off as Luka studied him. Luka thought to himself, his new spinal implant has improved his body's balance quite a bit. Seems like the money didn't go to waste. Kinuin stood outside the orphanage door, next to someone dressed in a black uniform. Gabriel, still holding the boxes, turned to Luka and asked with curiosity, although, Luka, just who is that man? If he's so infamous that even Aleph couldn't stand up to him, I should have heard of him. Luka's tone grew cautious. If I were you, I'd keep my nose out, unless you want to lose your head. Luka then thought to himself, this is probably the orphanage Kinuin grew up in. He's doing charity simply because he managed to make it out. Children ran around, their faces bright with excitement. One of them took a box from Luka and grinned. Thank you, handsome bro. Another took one from Gabriel and teased, thank you, ugly guy. Gabriel clicked his tongue and muttered, tisk, these kids are really mean for their age. Suddenly, Luka noticed a commotion. Hey! His gaze shifted to where two children were fighting over a box. One had black hair and looked stronger, while the other had brown hair and appeared weaker. The black-haired boy gripped one side of the box and growled, let go. This is mine. The brown-haired boy held the other side tightly. I picked it first. Luka observed the situation and thought to himself, the stronger one took it from the weaker one. Yeah, conquer with power. Nothing is fair, so strengthen yourself if there's something you want. This world isn't bountiful enough for everyone to be happy. Behind him, Kinuin called out. Luka. Luka turned, slightly surprised. Kinuin gestured backward. Let's talk. The two walked between the trees, stopping near the orphanage's metal fence. I stop by the lower sector from time to time, Kinuin said. The pay can't be high, so judging by how chubby the orphanage principal is, he's doing a good job smuggling the supplies out. Luka glanced at Kinuin and asked, did you grow up here? Kinuin closed his eyes. I've long forgotten such things. I just stop by a nearby orphanage occasionally. With his hands in his pockets, Kinuin smirked. I might have even visited the one you grew up in. Luka studied him and thought, this sight makes Kinuin look like any ordinary retired soldier. An old soldier without his former glory. His eyes then drifted to Kinuin's hand, it was trembling. With a nervous system that has broken down, because it was unable to withstand the overload, causing damage to his brain. That may be me in the future. Of course, I'd be lucky to live until then. Kinuin exhaled and met Luka's gaze. Let's get to the point. His next words hit Luka like a hammer. Who ordered you to come back to me? Luka's eyes shifted, his muscles tensing slightly. Kinuin's expression darkened, his glowing blue eyes narrowing. Was it Captain Hylas? Luka stepped away from the metal fence, his gaze meeting Kinuin's for a brief moment before he quickly turned away. What do you mean by that? He asked, his voice steady but cautious. His mind raced. Don't look into his eyes. With Kinuin's insight, every single movement, every subtle shift in expression, was a clue. How did he know they were orders from the Chief Centurion? Just how much does he already know? Luka clenched his fists slightly, feeling the tension creeping into his fingers. If Kinuin really is hiding something dangerous, something big enough for the Chief Centurion to be keeping tabs on him, his grip tightened, then he might eliminate me now. Kinuin took a slow step toward Luka, his expression unreadable. Calm down if you want to live, Luka. If you attack me with all your strength, it'd be difficult for me to restrain you without killing you. Luka hesitated, his breath quickening, but he forced himself to respond. I am a soldier of the Empire, that is all I can say. Kinuin shifted his foot slightly before speaking again. You know so little that you aren't even sure which direction to stick to. In the blink of an eye, Kinuin was suddenly beside him, his hand resting on Luka's shoulder. I don't intend to blame you. It's only natural for a soldier to follow orders from their superiors. You really are the ideal soldier the Empire seeks. His grip was firm, almost reassuring, but his words carried something unsettling beneath them. When you first came to me, did you really think it was of your own free will? When you performed projectile trajectory manipulation without an assisting processor, the higher-ups began their preparations. Finally, there was someone who could learn Archi's Victima like me. You might have thought you sought me out on your own accord, wanting strength after that incident in Korra, but in reality, it was all calculated by the Empire. You and I were meant to meet. Luka's mind reeled. Don't be swayed by Kinuin's words. He had met a powerful foe in battle and realized he needed to grow stronger. That was why I searched through the records of instructors and found someone to help me. This was my own decision. Forcing himself to speak, Luka muttered, I made the choice. Kinuin smiled faintly, shaking his head. Luka, every man in this world is someone's slave. The only difference is whether they know it or not. He inhaled deeply before continuing. Right now, you probably want to run away from the truth. You're still young, after all. Then, with a smirk, he turned and began walking away. You should head back. If you want to report to Hylas, feel free to do so. Luka stood frozen, unable to process it all. I don't believe Kinuin's words. But still, as Kinuin said, Chief Centurion Hylas had wanted him to continue learning Archi's Victima. His thoughts clashed against each other, spiraling into chaos. Do not doubt the Empire, Luka. All I want is success. Don't get swayed by his words. Don't think about it any further. Don't doubt. But then, a single thought crept in, one that refused to be ignored. But, if even my desire to succeed wasn't my own will, then who am I? The scene shifted to the simulation training room. Luka sat on a bench, his elbows resting on his knees, hands gripping his head in frustration. His expression was a mix of anger and unease as his thoughts spiraled. I wasn't able to report that day to Chief Centurion Hylas. If he had, they would have subjected him to a psychological exam, suspecting that he had been influenced by dangerous ideology. With how confused I am right now, my score would undoubtedly be lower than before. The Empire did not forgive those who harbored dangerous thoughts. In the worst-case scenario, they could dismiss me from my position as an Imperial Guard and send me to the forced labor camps. He clenched his jaw. Kinuin must have known I would hesitate to talk. Luka recalled Kinuin's parting words, you should head on back. If you want to report to Hylas, feel free to do so. Luka exhaled sharply, his resolve hardening. If I want to report to Hylas, I need to prepare myself to pass the psychological exam, and to do that, I need to meet him. Suddenly, a plume of steam rose from one of the simulation units. Emerging from it, drenched in sweat, was Ailey. His breathing was heavy, and his eyes were half-lidded from exhaustion. A water bottle was tossed in his direction. He caught it instinctively, blinking in surprise. Luka, arms crossed, regarded him with a smirk. So you do train as well, Ailey. I'm seeing you in a different light. Ailey exhaled, tilting his head back as he caught his breath. Losing to you might have rubbed me the wrong way. He walked toward Luka, rolling his shoulders. You came all the way here to cheer for your friend? I'm touched. Luka's smirk didn't fade. Obviously, I have a request. Ailey sat down on the bench beside him, wiping his face with his sleeve. You said prestigious families rigged the aptitude tests, right? It's a well-known secret, Ailey admitted, though the unqualified never make it past training. Luka looked away, his voice calm yet serious. Ailey, how did you pass the psychological portion of the aptitude tests? If you have a secret, let me in on it. Ailey glanced at him, expression unreadable. He swirled the water bottle in his hand before replying, you know that's an incredibly dangerous thing to ask me, right? Luka leaned back, staring at the empty room. I checked. No one else is here. And I'm doing this for the sake of the Empire. Ailey sighed, rubbing his temples. I won't ask why you need this, Luka, but as you might have guessed, there is a way. Luka's eyes narrowed. What is it? Ailey shut his eyes briefly, as if debating whether to continue. Then, he spoke. I guess there's no other way. Create a simpler version of your ego to interact with the outside world and place your true ego as an observer within yourself. Luka stared at him, dumbfounded. He struggled to process the words, but Ailey continued before he could ask anything. Essentially, we're sealing away the parts of our ego that we want to hide. That's how you pass the psychological exam. Luka shook his head, his confusion evident. What are you even saying? Ailey smirked. There are cases of normal people losing their memories or having their personalities changed due to trauma. We're just doing it consciously. Luka's frown deepened. Is that even possible? Fuck. I guess you wouldn't be telling me this if it wasn't. Ailey's smirk faded slightly as he leaned forward. Our brains live in a constant state of confusion. If you keep acting like a loyal soldier, the ego of being a loyal soldier will really develop on the surface of your mind. 2 months before the aptitude tests, I woke up every morning and gave my prayers of gratitude to the Emperor. I copied what my father does. The only issue is, if you do it for too long, it might shake your true ego. You could end up forgetting who you really are. Luka absorbed his words, his concern growing. Just where did you learn something like that? He looked down, deep in thought. In any case, if that's his method, I don't need to pretend to be someone else. I just need to act like my past self, the one who received a high score on the psychological exam. The me from before I met Ailey and Kinuin. Ailey watched him carefully. I don't know what you're trying to do, Luka, but be careful. Messing with the psychological exam is really dangerous. Luka exhaled, shaking his head. Never thought a day would come when I'd hear that from you. Before Ailey could respond, Luka's eyes flickered to his wrist as a notification appeared. His expression tensed. Ailey noticed the sudden shift in his demeanor. What's wrong? Luka's jaw tightened. Shit, bad timing. It was a call from Kinuin. The scene shifted to the lower sector, where Luka and Kinuin stood outside a tall, worn-down building, both dressed in casual attire. Luka tilted his head up, scanning the structure while Kinuin stood beside him, hands in his pockets. Luka, today's training is in action. It's quite simple, Kinuin said, his voice calm. This building is rather well built for a gang. Luka's thoughts churned. Kinuin is treating me the same, even after that day. As if that incident at the orphanage never happened. His fists clenched slightly, which is exactly why I feel even worse. Kinuin pointed toward the entrance. You have 20 seconds, Luka. They stood before a reinforced metal door. Kinuin's voice remained steady. Take down every gang member inside. Luka inhaled, then exhaled, slowly. Understood. Without hesitation, he grabbed the electronic lock pad with one hand and smashed it with a single punch. Sparks crackled as the locking mechanism shattered. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, cluttered with mismatched furniture. A gang boss lounged on a large chair at the far end, while one thug lay sprawled across a worn-out sofa. 3 others were gathered around a table, deep in a card game. The still air was thick with the scent of alcohol and cigarette smoke. A man with white hair, the one slouched on the sofa, lazily turned his head toward the sudden noise. His expression twisted with irritation as he saw Luka stepping in uninvited. He pushed himself up and strode toward him, scowling. What do you want, brat? His voice was laced with disdain. You don't look like a customer. Luka analyzed the situation swiftly. One idiot walked right up with a gun. His eyes flicked around the room. There are 3 armed thugs and one guy who appears to be their leader. I sent someone in the bathroom as well. The white-haired thug came to a stop right beside Luka, casually raising his gun and pointing it at his head. I wasn't planning to bust a kid's head open this early in the morning. My luck isn't very. Before he could finish, Luka's fist collided with his jaw. A sickening crack echoed through the room. The thug's body lifted off the ground, flung into the air like a ragdoll. The 3 gang members at the card table froze in panic, their eyes widening as their comrade hurtled toward them. Luka flexed his fingers, watching the faint tremor of force still lingering from his punch. His expression remained cold, but a smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. Good, he muttered to himself. A lot of things have been going on in my mind. Let me let off some steam. The white-haired thug was sent flying past the 3 gang members who had been playing cards. Their eyes widened in sheer panic as they watched their comrade crash into the ceiling. His grip loosened, and his gun slipped from his hand, tumbling toward the floor. The 3 gang members jolted from their seats, scrambling into position. As the pistol fell, Luka moved swiftly, catching it mid-air. With a calm, unwavering stance, he took aim and, in an instant, fired precise shots at their weapons, rendering them useless. Just as the gang leader raised his own pistol, his voice quivered with panic. Die, bastard. Luka dodged effortlessly, his movements fluid and calculated. He scoffed internally. Such shitty aim. It's unbelievable that people like him are making a living off killing when they're this bad at it. Without hesitation, he aimed his pistol at the gang leader. At that moment, the final gang member burst out of the bathroom, holding an electric rod. His confused voice cut through the tension. What's going on? Before he could process the scene before him, Luka pulled the trigger. A single, precise shot pierced the gang leader's skull, silencing him instantly. The last remaining gang member glanced around, his expression twisting in horror. What's with all that ruckus from earlier? Luka's sharp eyes caught the neural chip embedded in the man's neck, an automated failsafe. He aimed his gun at him, his voice cold and unwavering. If I were you, I'd knock myself unconscious. Wouldn't want to lose those hard-earned limbs. The man's body trembled. Sweat dripped down his forehead as his gaze darted between his fallen comrades. A sudden, high-pitched electric hum filled the air. A violent jolt ran through his body as he collapsed to the floor, lifeless. He had taken his own life with the electric rod. Luka exhaled sharply. I can still sense someone in the bathroom. He moved toward the door, kicking it open. His eyes widened slightly as he took in the sight before him, a long-haired woman, her body trembling, hands bound with rope. Her crimson hair cascaded over her bare shoulders, her eyes filled with fear and exhaustion. Luka's jaw tightened, his blood boiled. Damn fuckers. Her wrists were raw from the tight bindings. Without a second thought, he stepped forward and scooped her up into his arms. Kinuin, standing near the entrance, observed the scene with an unreadable expression. It took you about 12 seconds, he noted, his voice indifferent. As Luka exited the room, he pulled his jacket over the woman, shielding her from prying eyes. His movements were careful, yet his anger was barely contained. Kinuin clapped his hands together, smirking. Good job, my boy. Luka shot him a glare, his fury barely restrained. Can't we just kill those fuckers? Kinuin's expression remained composed. Don't forget that we're outsiders. Any further interference will disrupt the rules of this place. Either way, there are countless people in the world who lack the power to defend themselves. You're well aware of what happens to them, right? Luka remained silent, his fists clenched. He looked down at the red-haired woman, her fragile body trembling in his arms. His thoughts churned. This woman suffered such a fate because she didn't possess the strength to defy it. Meanwhile, I fought my entire life to ensure I never end up like her. He would have normally called people like her fools, those who failed to grasp the opportunities offered by the Empire. But at that moment, he felt something else entirely. Disgust. Not toward her, but toward the world that allowed this kind of suffering. Kinuin continued taking Luka into the lower sectors after that day, pushing him into fights without any prior information. But it wasn't about teaching him how to win. The lesson wasn't about victory, it was about optimization. Understanding the enemy's capabilities was a basic rule, but Kinuin demanded more. Luka had to analyze, adapt, and manipulate the battlefield itself. And so, Kinuin kept sending him into fights, without a single word of instruction. The scene shifted to a repair shop, where the red-haired woman, now wearing round glasses, was busy working. She looked up as the door opened and greeted the newcomers with a warm smile. Ah, welcome. Both Luka and Kinuin entered the shop. Kinuin waved his hand casually and said, Gilda, get me a cup of coffee. A long black, with a layer of oil on top. Luka glanced around the shop, taking in the mechanical parts and tools scattered across the workbenches. Gilda turned to him with a playful smirk. And you, Luka? Would you like a cup of milk? Still scanning the shop, Luka replied without looking at her, I'll also get coffee. No oil. He then turned to Kinuin and asked, was there a need to make a stop at Gilda's workshop? Kinuin leaned against the counter and replied, she's a woman you saved. Don't you feel a sense of pride seeing her work so hard? Luka's gaze shifted to Gilda, who was preparing their coffee. His thoughts drifted. I recently rescued this woman from a gang. She told us her story, a tale of survival. She had been kidnapped and endured months of torment. But unlike many, her mind remained intact. She managed to return to everyday life. As for the reason she was kidnapped, it wasn't even her fault. A so-called friend of hers, who had stolen money from the gang, had stayed at her place. When the gang came looking for him, they took her instead. That friend, the root of the issue, is already dead. Both Luka and Kinuin took their seats at a table. Kinuin spoke. Gilda is from an orphanage. She had a talent for mechanical engineering as a child, so I funded her education. Kept the whole thing anonymous, though, so she wouldn't know about it. Luka raised a brow. So, you were acquainted with her from the start? Before Kinuin could answer, a familiar voice interrupted. Oh ho. Annoyed, Luka turned to see Gabriel walking toward them with his usual grin. You're here too, good boy? Gabriel then turned to Gilda and said, Gilda, get me a beer, please. Carrying a tray with coffee, Gilda shot him a sharp look. Your neural system is already strained from overworking your body. How about you pass on the alcohol? Luka's thoughts wandered again. After we saved Gilda, Kinuin introduced her to Gabriel. From then on, he became Gilda's bodyguard, and she became Gabriel's mechanic. Luka glanced at Gabriel and agreed with Gilda, saying, you better listen to your mechanic, Gabriel. Gabriel scoffed, clearly irritated. It's just one beer, man. As Gilda set down 2 cups of coffee and a bowl of sugar, Gabriel suddenly leaned in and shouted into Luka's ear. Though, aren't you the one who's been poking beehives left and right recently? Just what are you thinking? The gang bosses have started talking about making a move against you. If they proceed with that, even I can't ensure Gilda's safety. Luka, reaching for the sugar, froze. Kinuin, however, remained unfazed, sipping his coffee. You don't need to worry about that. We would not be able to come here for a while. Gilda, still holding the tray to her chest, frowned. For a while? How long, exactly? Kinuin took another sip before replying. Could be a couple of months. Or a few years. Who knows? Luka's expression hardened as a realization hit him. We won't be able to come down here to the lower sectors for a long time. I can't even come here by myself. My superiors would never allow a trainee to leave on their own. His gaze shifted toward Gilda and Gabriel. This could be the last time I see them. Even after enduring such a terrible experience, Gilda had found a way to accept her reality and start working again. She smiled and said, "You'll stop by again soon, right?" And Gabriel, reckless as always, continued to take on more risks while working in his field. He smirked and said, "Shouldn't we do some kind of send-off party?" Luka picked up his cup, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. His thoughts remained firm. "Don't pity them, Luka. Not being able to come here again might be the best thing for my current situation." He took a sip, then muttered under his breath, "Why do people drink this bitter stuff?" The scene shifted to the Chief Centurion's office. Luka stood before Hylas Castoria and reported, "That is all." Hylas leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful as he responded, "Kinuin continues to engage in peculiar activities. He became a trainee at a rather late age, an opportunity he normally never would have received. But at the time, the Empire needed to accept impurities if necessary. Chaos was unfolding everywhere." Thinking about Kinuin, Hylas continued, "Even I am not quite sure what kind of man Kinuin truly is. When I was just a fresh recruit, he was already one of the key members of the Imperial Guard. We presume he specialized in discreet, secret operations." Luka's mind raced. So even the Chief Centurion lacks access to his records. Hylas folded his hands on the desk and added, "Anyway, it appears to be true that Kinuin has taken a liking to you. I've sent trainees to him before, but none lasted long." He then pressed a button on his desk and looked directly at Luka. "You are excellent, but you are also in a position vulnerable to negative influences. A psychological exam will be scheduled for you. Make sure to receive it." Luka nodded. "As you say." His thoughts, however, were firm. "It's as I expected." Hylas exhaled, rubbing his temple, before speaking with a frank tone, "Luka, let me be clear. There are only two outcomes for trainees who receive missions like this. They are either eliminated to keep a secret, or they rise to the heart of the Imperial Guard as a reward for their contributions." He extended a hand toward Luka. "I hope that you will end up as the latter." Luka's expression remained unreadable as he replied, "I merely follow the orders given to me. If this operation ends well, I trust that you will vouch for me, Commander." For a brief moment, Hyla's eyes gleamed red, but then a smirk appeared on his face. "Yes. If your results are satisfactory, I will stand behind you." He paused before adding, "To be exact, I will adopt you as my son." Luka's eyes widened in shock. "You will be called Luka Castoria." Haha. Luka stood frozen, disbelief flooding his mind. "What? The Chief Centurion wants to take me in as his son." Hylas Castoria, his name carries power. The Castoria family is one of the most renowned in the Empire. Holy shit. Meanwhile, in the testing facility, two robots stood before Luka, preparing to administer the psychological exam. One of them spoke in a mechanical tone, "Luka, we will begin the psychological evaluation." Luka inhaled deeply, his expression unreadable. "All right." As the scanning process began, one of the robots observed his expression and commented, "I detect joy in your demeanor. Did something pleasant occur?" Luka's face darkened instantly. "None of your damn business. Start the exam." The scene shifted to the training grounds, where Aile was relentlessly practicing close combat. His fist struck the punching bag with force, his kick sending it swinging through the air. Sweat dripped onto the ground beneath him, but he didn't stop. With one final, powerful strike, the bag lifted off the floor for a moment before settling back in place. Aile stood there, breathing heavily, his body drenched in sweat. Applying a cooling cream to his arm, his expression neutral as he winced slightly from the soreness. Nearby, Luka sat on a bench. Without looking up, he remarked, "Looks like you practiced until your joints wore out. Are you really the Aile I know?" Aile clenched his fist, his voice tense as he asked, "Did you pass the psychological exam?" Luka met his gaze, his expression unreadable, before replying, "Yes, thanks to you." Luka's smirk faded as he sensed something off. He observed Aile more carefully before asking, "But Aile, I don't know what's going on. Let me know if I can help with anything." Aile's usual carefree expression disappeared, replaced by something more serious, almost conflicted. "I can't tell you about it right now," Aile admitted, his tone uncertain. "But soon, I'll ask you for a favor. Is that okay?" Luka remained silent for a moment, lowering his gaze. Then, shifting his eyes toward Aile without turning his head, he finally closed his eyes and responded, "If you find yourself in danger during combat, I will come to rescue you, even if I have to risk my life to do it." Aile let out a small smile before replying, "Thanks, Luka," but after a brief pause, his expression darkened again. "So, as I said, I'll tell you about it soon. I hope it all doesn't go the way I think, but..." Luka listened but said nothing. "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious about Aile's favor." He thought to himself, but I didn't feel like going out of my way to figure it out. Now that I've done well on the psychological exam and even earned the Chief Centurion's trust, my goal has shifted. Becoming the son of the Castoria family, that was the only thing lingering in my mind. The scene shifted. Hylas Castoria stood before a gathering of Imperial Guard trainees, arms crossed, his presence commanding absolute silence. From this moment, Hylas announced, his voice deep and unwavering, "We will operate under a special military order." The trainees stood at attention, their gazes fixed forward. Hylas continued, "Its purpose is to suppress the rebels who have risen against the Empire. The rebel forces consist of 3 families, led by the Ramonis family." Luka's eyes widened in shock as he murmured under his breath, "The Ramonis family?" His stomach twisted, and his gaze immediately darted toward Ailey, who stood beside him, his face unreadable. Then, in a moment of chilling realization, Luka's thoughts aligned. Lilian Ramonis. I understand Ailey's favor now. All the trainees stood outside the massive flying ship, their armored figures dwarfed by the towering combat mechs stationed nearby. One by one, they began boarding the spacecraft, each donning their combat armor, their expressions a mixture of discipline and tension. Inside, as the corridor lights flickered to life, the ship rumbled forward, moving through the launch bay's passageway. Luka stood at the front, facing the assembled platoon. "My name is Luka. As of now, I am the leader of the 21st Suppression Army Platoon." In front of him stood Imperial Guards, most of them older and more experienced than him. A black-haired soldier, standing just beside Luka, raised his hand in salute and spoke loudly, "We salute the platoon leader." Luka observed the men standing before him, their expressions unreadable, their discipline unwavering. To think they would make Imperial Guard trainees serve as platoon leaders, he thought to himself. The higher-ups are using this uprising as nothing more than training. Regardless, my platoon consists of 2 squads, totaling 27 soldiers, with Sergeant Kodrak as my second-in-command. Though we trainees may be inexperienced, the suppression forces are filled with battle-hardened veterans. Each of them knows they are merely being used as tools for our training. This alone makes it unlikely that they will follow the orders of a superior whose abilities they do not trust. Luka narrowed his eyes. Despite that, I have to take control and command them myself. Now, what should I do? Well, I have 2 options. The first, leave everything to Sergeant Kodrak. Even if Luka gave vague orders, Kodrak would manage the details. That would be the safest, most standard approach. The other method, however. Luka suddenly spoke, his voice sharp and commanding. "I am superior to all of you." A tense silence fell over the platoon. Kodrak's expression shifted, a look of worry flashing across his face. But Luka didn't stop. "So I ask that you follow my orders exactly as I give them. Any form of disobedience will be considered a punishable offense." The soldiers exchanged glances, their unease evident. The other method is to crush their resistance here and now, before it festers, Luka thought to himself. The tension in the air thickened, his words shocking the platoon into silence. But before Luka could turn away, Kodrak stepped forward, placing a hand on Luka's shoulder. "Platoon leader Luka, just a moment." Luka grabbed Kodrak's wrist in an instant, twisting it sharply before throwing him backward. Kodrak's body crashed into a group of soldiers standing in line, sending them stumbling. The entire platoon stiffened in disbelief. Luka's eyes locked onto Kodrak as he rose from the ground, stunned. "You dare lay your hands on a superior, without permission?" Luka's voice was low, sharp, and edged with authority. "Do you take me for a fool because of my age, Sergeant Kodrak?" Luka stepped forward, his presence suffocating as he continued, "I am from the lower sectors, just like all of you. I even grew up in a double-digit orphanage, and I am younger than most of you. But do you know why there is such a difference in our social standing, despite all that?" The air around him grew heavy as his expression darkened. "It's because I am immensely superior to all of you." Luka's eyes gleamed red, his voice unwavering as he declared, "You may not understand now, but you will soon. I am a better platoon leader than anyone you will ever meet." Kodrak's face tensed with worry as he processed Luka's words. Then, after a moment of silence, he slowly stood up, straightened his posture, and bowed his head slightly. "I realize my mistake. I will be more careful, Platoon Leader Luka." Luka closed his eyes briefly before turning away, stepping forward with calm precision. As he walked past them, his thoughts remained steady. Sergeant Kodrak is quick to understand. He realized that I didn't pick the easy way out. The scene shifted to the Imperial Army outpost, positioned near the enemy rebel fort. Massive air defense cannons were installed at the main entrance, their barrels aimed toward the sky, ready to shoot down any aerial threats. Above, an Imperial spaceship hovered, its engines humming with restrained power. Inside the vessel, soldiers stood in rigid lines, awaiting their briefing. Among them, Ailey held his face in his hand, sighing. "So, you couldn't hold back your temper and ended up beating one of your platoon members? Huh." Standing beside him, Luka replied in a calm but firm tone, "I just felt that my aide was going to treat me like a child." Ailey scoffed. "We are children in their eyes." Luka shook his head. "No. But if you act too kindly, your subordinates won't give you any respect." Suddenly, the room's lighting shifted, signaling the beginning of the briefing. Both Luka and Ailey turned their attention forward. Standing before them was Hylas Castoria, his presence commanding. "Let us skip the formalities," Hylas began. "The rebels are stationed at the relic site of the Arcane civilization." Behind him, a blue holographic map flickered into existence, illuminating the dimly lit chamber. "All operations within the Arcane fortress are under their command now. The site is surrounded by 2 defensive walls, and a high-density force barrier acts as a dome, shielding the fort. We have identified 5 arcane turrets positioned to shoot down aerial targets. The 11th Armored Brigade has been tasked with leading the attack to destroy them. Once the turrets are eliminated, the rest of the army will launch a full-scale assault from all sides." Luka, standing in formation, narrowed his eyes as he analyzed the situation. The Armored Brigade, all of its members, use full-body combat armor. The Empire is deploying a massive force for this suppression. Hylas continued, "The operation begins at 1410 hours, which is in 1 hour and 30 minutes. Complete your preparations by then." Outside the Imperial spaceship, Luka and Ailey stood near the loading ramp, gazing out at the battlefield ahead. Luka exhaled, "Well, just as I expected, we're only here as support." Ailey crossed his arms. "Of course. They wouldn't want us actually dying out here." Luka smirked. "Then how is this any different from a picnic?" Ailey gave him a side glance. "You know, you sound like a complete warhawk right now." Ailey then bit his lip, hesitation flickering across his face. Luka cut him off abruptly. "Are you trying to talk about the Ramonis family?" Ailey's expression tensed with uncertainty. Luka's voice hardened. "Look, you may be close to them, but there's nothing we can do, Ailey. If you side with those who have committed treason, not even your family will be able to save you." Ailey clenched his teeth, his fists tightening. "I'm not hoping for any miracles. But if there's even the slightest chance." His voice wavered as he admitted, "Then I hope to rescue Lillian, at least." Luka's eyes darkened, and in an instant, he jabbed a finger into Ailey's chest, his anger flaring. "You love her so much that you'd risk your life for her?" Ailey's gaze remained steady. "She was my first love. I don't have any feelings for her now." Luka tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "So you tried to hook me up with your first love?" Ailey exhaled. "Lillian doesn't want to marry a noble." Luka's face darkened further, his eyes glowing a faint red as he spoke with cold finality. "Get a fucking grip, Ailey. I've overlooked your antics until now, but this crosses the line. Trying to save Lillian is beyond reckless. If you get caught, you'll be executed on the spot." Then, without another word, Luka turned and began walking away. As he distanced himself, he left Ailey with one final warning: "Don't do anything stupid, Ailey. Consider this your last warning." Ailey stood there, his expression hardening, his face dark with resolve. Without another word, he turned and walked off in the opposite direction. Luka glanced back, his brows furrowing in worry. His instincts screamed at him. "This damned Archie's Victima forces me to know the truth. That fool. He's planning to get Lillian out at any cost. It doesn't matter whether Ailey himself acknowledges it or not. For his own sake, Lillian Ramonis must die." As he walked, Luka silently prayed, his thoughts laced with desperation. "I will pray that she never meets Ailey alive. That is my desperate wish." Luka sat inside the transport ship, staring down at his helmet, deep in thought. All that matters is the head and chest. As long as those 2 areas remain intact, soldiers of the Empire cannot die. As long as you can breathe and blood continues to flow to your brain, the Empire will revive you with cybernetic technology. His fingers tightened around the edges of his helmet as he let that thought settle. Then, Kodrak approached him, his tone steady as he addressed him. "Platoon Leader Luka." Without shifting his gaze, Luka replied, "Say what you need to say." Kodrak hesitated for a brief moment before speaking. "I am well aware of your capabilities. I make it a point to thoroughly assess the expertise of my superiors." Luka turned his head slightly, his expression indifferent. "So?" As the transport vehicle rumbled forward, Kodrak continued, "What I want to say is this: when we enter combat, please heed my words. I have served the Empire for 10 years. I may not be as capable as you, but my skills are not without value. Luka closed his eyes for a second before answering, don't worry about that. I'll listen to anyone if their suggestion is valid. Hearing this, Kodrak lowered his head slightly in respect. Thank you. The transport suddenly came to a halt, and a mechanical hum filled the air. Outside, the other vehicles stopped beside a vast blue barrier, the fortress defense field. As the ramp lowered, armored soldiers stepped out, their eyes glowing red beneath their helmets. Luka studied them closely, analyzing their form and movement. Armored Brigade, full-body mechanical armor model, Myrmidon. So that's the Empire's mass-produced combat armor. They're tasked with taking down the turrets, only after that do we step in. Inside the transport, Luka and Kodrak watched a tactical screen, displaying a live feed of the battlefield. Commencing fire, a robotic voice announced. Explosions erupted as the Myrmidons activated their thrusters, lifting into the air in coordinated squadrons. They soared toward the blue energy barrier, their red eyes gleaming. The turrets inside the barrier detected their movement. A warning signal flared. Energy began gathering around the turrets, an ominous hum reverberating as the force barrier intensified. Sensing the imminent strike, the Myrmidons responded immediately. They launched flares to disrupt the targeting system of the Arcane turrets. Then, a blinding blast of energy. A barrage of high-density energy beams shot out from the turrets, tearing through the air like streaks of molten lightning. Several Myrmidons were struck mid-flight, their armor shattered upon impact, engulfed in flames before they plummeted to the ground. Others, however, skillfully maneuvered, dodging the oncoming energy barrages as they pressed forward toward the barrier. As the turrets prepared for another wave of attacks, the remaining Myrmidons deployed their missile pods. Hidden compartments in their mechanical frames slid open, revealing rows of guided missiles. Missiles away. With a deafening roar, multiple projectiles launched simultaneously, streaking through the sky in synchronized arcs. The barrier erupted in flames as the missiles struck from all directions, shaking the fortress walls. Smoke billowed into the air, thick and suffocating. But amidst the chaos, a faint red glow flickered behind the blackened smoke. The Myrmidons were still advancing. The turrets recalibrated, charging up for another devastating counterattack. But the Myrmidons refused to slow down. In a single, synchronized motion, they drew their weapons, long, spear-like weapons, glowing with an otherworldly hue. With an explosive burst of speed, they plunged toward the barrier, spears in hand. The moment the first spearhead made contact, a deafening screech of energy surged through the battlefield. The barrier trembled violently at the impact. Cracks spread like veins across its surface. Then another Myrmidon struck. Then another, and another. With each impact, the fractures deepened, until, a shattering explosion, the barrier collapsed in on itself, disintegrating into flickering embers of energy. Luka, watching the screen from inside the transport vehicle, clenched his fist. They've successfully breached the fortress. His eyes remained fixed on the display, scanning for the next phase of the mission. Now, it's up to them to neutralize the turrets. If they fail, then we'll be forced to advance under heavy fire. According to the calculations from the strategic simulator, the estimated time for the turrets to be fully taken down was 1 minute after entry. If the Myrmidons failed, the suppression forces would have to push forward, at a devastating cost. The screen flickered. Then, a warning buzz. Signal lost. Luka's fingers instinctively twitched. What? For a tense moment, silence filled the transport. Then, a new message flashed onto the screen. The turrets have been neutralized. Please proceed to the next stage of the operation. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Faces that were once tense now lit up with relief. A murmur of excitement and satisfaction spread through the soldiers and officers alike. Luka leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose as a smirk formed on his lips. The battlefield is a cruel and dangerous place, he thought. But it's also where men find joy in the rush of adrenaline. His fingers lightly tapped against the surface of his helmet as his eyes glowed with a dark thrill. And honestly, I love it too. He let out a short, quiet laugh. I, too, am a man who finds accomplishment and joy in this wicked place. If I hadn't, he smirked, slipping his helmet on as the signal came through for deployment orders, I would have gone insane a long time ago. Luka stepped out of the transport vehicle, his voice cutting through the tension. Let's go. As he moved forward, his thoughts raced. Now, it's time for me to put my capabilities to the test. The plan is straightforward. Infantry will enter from all directions simultaneously. Our superiors have ensured there's no room for the rebels to escape. The underground tunnels of the Arcane fortress stretch deep, spanning several hundred meters, a maze carved beneath the ruins. Though we have maps from previous expeditions, the rebels have likely modified the layout. Those maps could be useless. As Luka and his team advanced, the ground trembled with explosions, mines detonating in the distance. Each step was taken with precision, their senses heightened. Then, Luka's eyes locked onto an entrance ahead, narrowing slightly. They must have narrowed the entry points to prevent myrmidons from infiltrating. The squad entered through a heavy steel door, stepping into a dark, overgrown corridor. Vines and weeds crawled along the damp walls, evidence that this passage hadn't been used in ages. The air was thick with dust and decay. Luka's voice cut through the silence. "I'll lead from here." Beside him, Kodrak frowned. "That's a dangerous move in a place like this, Commander. The likelihood of traps or an ambush is extremely high." Luka turned to him, his gaze unwavering. "Are you afraid of dealing with the consequences if I die?" Kodrak let out a breath. "To be honest, yes. Now, if you understand." Luka slid his helmet on, his expression darkening beneath the visor. "I don't care what happens after I die, Kodrak. Whether your pay is halved or not is of no concern to me." Without another word, he pushed forward at full speed. "I'll say it again. I'll lead. Follow me." The squad exchanged glances but obeyed, their footsteps echoing through the silent corridor. Luka's thoughts spiraled as he advanced. "I can feel it. The chill creeping up my spine. The unease in my men's posture. They're ready to gun me down the moment they get the chance. But I don't have time to worry about that. I need to reach Lilian Ramonis and eliminate her before Islay gets there." Islay must already be inside the tunnels, having entered from a different point. If he's willing to sacrifice his troops to advance, he'll break through quickly. I could do the same, throw away lives to gain ground. But I refuse to let my personal emotions cost the lives of my soldiers. I'll bear the risks myself. A sudden shift in the air, a faint mechanical whir above. Luka's eyes darted upward. A turret mechanism activated, locking onto him. "Commander Luka." Kodrak's voice rang out, laced with urgency. Luka's eyes flashed white. In a single, precise motion, his blade sliced through the turret, severing it before it could fire. The broken metal clattered to the ground in a shower of sparks. Luka's breathing remained steady. Using the Archy's combat method, I pushed all my senses to their limit. Sight, hearing, touch, smell, even taste. His tongue detected the faint traces of gunpowder and chemicals in the air, feeding him more information than sight alone could. He surged forward, slicing down traps before they could activate. Behind him, the soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, struggling to keep up with his pace. Luka's heart pounded violently in his chest. I can feel it. My arteries expanding. The rush of blood fueling my brain, keeping me sharp, keeping me fast. But the pressure, it's pushing me beyond my limits. His thoughts grew darker, his mind slipping into the depths of the combat haze. I'm sick of everything. It's frustrating how slow my men are. I feel like punching Kodrak in the face. I knew about it in theory, but now, I can feel it in real time. Prolonged use of Archy's Victima is gradually damaging my brain. His vision blurred at the edges, but his instincts remained razor-sharp. At the end of the corridor, a reinforced door stood tall, rebel soldiers positioned behind it, weapons drawn. One of them, sweating profusely, murmured, "Phew," trying to steady his breath. Before he could react, Luka's foot struck the door with brutal force. The metal blasted inward like a cannonball, crushing a soldier behind it, his body flung across the room like a ragdoll. The remaining rebel soldiers panicked, weapons raised. Luka stepped into the doorway, his sword gleaming under the dim lighting. The rebels opened fire. Luka, frustrated behind his helmet, moved with inhuman precision, his blade a blur as he deflected every bullet midair. He surged forward, dodging effortlessly through the hail of gunfire. With a single arc of his sword, one soldier's head was severed cleanly. The second barely had time to register what had happened before his throat was cut in a swift, silent motion. The third dropped his weapon, his hands trembling, but before he could flee, Luka's sword cleaved through his neck. Another rebel, stationed in the back, raised a rocket launcher, his last desperate attempt to stop the monster before him. Luka's eyes locked onto the missile spiraling toward him. With one swing, his blade split the rocket in two. The explosion roared as fire and smoke engulfed the room. Through the thick haze, two crimson lights pierced through the darkness. Luka's red visor. The last rebel's hand shook violently as he stared at the figure emerging from the smoke, unfazed, unscathed, untouched. He tried to run, a single slash. Blood splattered against the walls. Luka's squad finally arrived at the massacre, Kodrak at the forefront. His expression darkened as he surveyed the absolute carnage before him. Luka, his sword dripping crimson, turned to face him. What are you waiting for, Sergeant Kodrak? Kodrak swallowed. The man before him wasn't human anymore. He was a demon in black armor. Luka's helmet glowed ominously, red light flickering like the eyes of a beast. His voice was low, commanding, merciless. We are moving forward. As blood dripped from his sword, Luka's tone sharpened. Make sure to keep up.